Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cyberhuman Frontiers. You are now with us on our continuing exploration of our technological world, juxtaposed against what it is to be a human being, and the merging of the two somehow into the unknown. We've embarked on a multi-year mission into the brave new world of the joining and conjunction of those two. And we can only hope that humanity in aggregate has the wisdom to implement all of it in such a way so that we don't wind up sacrificing some of the fundamentals of being a human being. So we've covered so many topics, and we sometimes concentrate on the more technological. Sometimes we place our emphasis on patents, things that have been designed and have been built and prototyped and are now making their way into the consumer market. We have also covered a little bit regarding the molecular biology side of things, and that it really does promise in one way to be a new frontier for the development of computing equipment by using very, very small transistor junctions that are not made of silicon, but they're made of biomolecules, and on and on and on. So we've got a whole lot that you can tap into and that you can enjoy, and you can educate yourself and inform yourself about what the state of affairs is, if you will, and put that into. It can be good to help to put it into a perspective of what we see going on in our world today. And there's a tendency to get caught up in just the current news and, get all buried in that. But sometimes it's good to take a look at the overall picture. To that point, I want to, on your scroller on the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little note regarding TMC's website. It is https://humaninternet.org. And we encourage you to go over there and just survey what he's put there for you. And there are links to videos and information and articles and patents. Pretty much everything that we talk about shows up there. And before we get too far into it, I'm going to just get our little community guidelines disclaimer out of the way, and we'll read this quickly. The points of view and purpose of this video is not to induce fear or incite violence or harass or bully or in any way, but to share and exchange thoughts and ideas with other like-minded individuals curious about the subject. This is to encourage conversation and awareness. The opinions expressed in this video belong solely to the persons espousing them, not a representation of the channel, and none of our videos claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. The content is created entirely, quote-unquote, for your entertainment. This video in our channel may from time to time contain certain copyrighted works not specifically authorized, but which we believe in good faith are protected by federal law and the Fair Use Doctrine for one of the more reasons noted in the Copyright Act of 1976 and elsewhere. To that point, we will be featuring some content from other people who have both written and created visual content for you to enjoy. And we make it our practice to acknowledge them very warmly for their excellent work. And you will always find those links either before or just after our show concludes in our show notes below the video. That being out of the way, we now engage with the subject at hand. But before we do that, TMC, just want to check in with you. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Andy. I'm doing good.
Excellent. All right. So the leader line for today's topic is the psychology of privacy. Psychology of privacy. And there's a lot that's feeding into that. Now, what happens when today's technology begins to redefine what we may have grown up to be accustomed to as what was privacy? So as of all of the various operations and machinations that we go through in our functioning lives day to day, we're going to spotlight these two. because it occurred in our reflection on what we would discuss over the course of the preceding week, that there is an inner self and there's an outer self, and they're really the same person, but there's a space, and they've existed for eons, since the beginning of the conscious human being. There's always been the inside in your own mind of mind, or your heart of hearts, or your mind's eye, if you will, or the dream state or the meditative state, and that's all the inner stuff. The private space versus the public space. So what we're hoping to do in our discussion tonight is to help to get us to presence our minds in those two distinctly different modes of being. And now, what happens in that inner space versus when we're out and about? We're the same person, but we do different things for different reasons. And is there something important in terms of balance, vitality? Oh, excuse me, a frog in the throat. Excuse me, hold on one sec. Okay, I'm back now. Is there something that occurs in the private space, in your mind's eye, or in your conscious review of thoughts and emotions as well, versus what happens out there in the greater world at large? Does interacting in that extended world help us to input information into what we'll decide to integrate into ourself? And that might be something that we do more in that meditative state. Does interacting in that extended world interacting at its best, depend on having had some of that inner space, that reflective time, during which we internally organize all of our thoughts and priorities? Now, we've entered into a new age in which we're more and more connected, excuse me, by way of technology. And I would submit to you that as we've seen these modifications take place in our world, it may have, and I would say definitely has changed our perspective of ourselves in that world. Merely the knowledge that personal data acquisition, archiving, and analysis by behaviorally predictive algorithms, among other things, just that alone causes us to see and interact with the world differently. And you can even take it a little bit further. This is extended now even further into the mapping and cataloging of an individual's DNA. For example, companies like 23andMe, you're looking up your genetic heritage, all that stuff. But don't forget, when that's done, then some of that information is also cataloged for future reference by the organization, which means that your individual DNA code, the software, which is in some sense and in a significant sense, the innermost sanctum of who we each are, is now something that is out in an outside space. It's no longer just residing inside you. Reading, duplication, and modification of that DNA code, which is something that's unique to every individual, and potentially altering that code by way of the germline to our offspring, if there were modification of DNA which was done, and it can be done, the technology is well within reach. That extends far into the core of our selfness as human beings. Now, we're not trying to suggest that having the outside world know about us, know about that selfness is a bad thing. Not at all. The question at hand is, if we know that the inner space, that the boundary between the inner space and the outer space has become fuzzy or has become compromised in some way, and it has become no longer a separate private inner space, is there anything that we lose in the process? I think it would be a certainty to say that it would alter our behavior. It would alter the way that we view ourselves and the world. Could it affect an individual's sense of personal power, autonomy, creativity, maybe even impact a little bit on self-confidence or self-reliance. And how would we change, or how would we be changed if we knew that there was no longer any completely private time, no completely private space? Now, this ties into some of our previous episodes where we've spotlighted, we've really gotten right down into it, where laboratories and research institutions are working very diligently at the process of being able to attach microscopically designed nanorobots and nano interface devices to individual brain cells. And those individual nano devices are capable of having individual IP numbers, addressable numbers. So you've got a number associated with every brain neuron. And if that wouldn't be a junction or a bridge from the inner space to the outer space, then I don't know what is. So these are interesting questions. They're highly relevant to our present times, and technology continues to advance, and we just want to help to bring this all up, because it comes right down to home when you look at things from the standpoint of the psychology of privacy. What will that do to alter our self-view, our worldview, and our interaction with that outside world? And so that's kind of a little bit of a way of tying a lot of things together. So I'm going to load up. I have a number of articles and a number of videos that we're going to pull pieces from, and I'm going to load one of them up right now. This is kind of a good intro. While I'm doing that, TMC, any initial thoughts that you might have on this?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the idea of privacy, if you are a Christian or a Muslim, or you believe in God of any type, a couple questions arise. Where is God at any time? Right? And how often is God there? He, she, I don't know what the pronouns are. Probably there are none, but anyway.
The creator. Yeah.
You get the idea, right? So the point is this: somebody believes or does not believe in whatever it is they choose to believe, but for the sake of what I'm going to say here, right? If somebody doesn't believe in the creator, God, for example, and let's take Christianity as the example in this case, and then all of a sudden they do believe, and you answer those questions, where is God? God's everywhere. How often is God there? All the time. Where's your privacy? And then all of a sudden it becomes, well, now, there's a relationship there. I'm being watched, being evaluated. I'm being monitored and I'm being evaluated.
Right.
As part of this relationship that now has formed. Having faith, a belief in a creator. Right? So the state, government, the state is a second example of this attempt at omnipresence in order to function essentially as God.
I like the way you put that.
And that's surveillance in a philosophical nutshell.
Well, there's kind of a difference between, let's take not to put the emphasis on any one particular form of spiritual belief, but let's say that a Christian has accepted the concept that the Creator is everywhere, omniscient and omnipresent, and knows everything. Then if one accepted that belief that the creator is all powerful, then if obviously the creator created you and me. So there's an inherent trust. There's an implicit trust right there. Well, if you created me and you're all powerful, then I pretty much kind of need to tune into you, dear creator, so that I kind of, go along with the general way that things are supposed to be. Versus if an organization such as the state were to have that same power, there's nothing that ever was established about a trust there. There's nothing that suggests that you should trust the state, but there's everything that suggests that if your creator is in your mind and in your body, that you might as well trust the creator. It's totally different thing.
Yeah, it's a relationship that's founded upon force, fear, and coercion versus faith.
Right. And even if one is somewhat afraid of the creator, let's say you've been a bad boy or a bad girl, and say, oh man, the creator will be mad at me. Well, still, if one acknowledges that the creator created you, then one might as well just say, well, I really ought to try to tune in to what would be appropriate behavior and appropriate thinking and an appropriate way to live life, so that that which created me would find that it was not only satisfactory, but perhaps pleasing. So again, the state didn't create us. There's nothing inherently about them that should give them any authority, but they're working very hard to gain the power to get into our mind's eye and to get into the ability to influence us both psychologically and physically. And they've been doing it. There's nothing that ever gave them the qualifications or the legitimacy to do so. You know what I'm getting at? Now, this show is for entertainment purposes only, all right? So we only talk about these things just for fun, all right? But that's kind of the root of it, is trust versus no necessary qualifications to have trust. Why does privacy matter? All right. Well, I'm going to start off with a little video here. This just kind of gives you the background, a lot of things that we already sort of know. This is a TEDx talk. It was done quite some while ago by Glenn Greenwald, Why Privacy Matters. And we'll play a little bit of this, and I have a few others and some reading. I might even broach over into an actual definition of privacy. Kind of a dictionary definition of it. We can get into that a little bit too. And then the psychological sides of it. So here we go initially.
Behavior, wild singing, gyrating, dancing, some mild sexual activity, only to discover that, in fact, they are not alone, that there's a person watching and lurking, the discovery of which causes them to immediately cease what they're doing in horror. The sense of shame and humiliation in their face is palpable. It's the sense of, this is something I'm willing to do only if no one else is watching.
Perfect example, all right? You're in your house, some tune comes on, if you're like me, maybe you try to dance, but you're certainly not any rock star at it. So, gyrating, having fun, getting some physiological activity there, getting a little bit of a workout. But you'd probably feel completely at ease, perhaps tripping over your left foot while you're enjoying the music, but still getting a nice aerobic workout if you're by yourself. But if you knew that that was being logged, if you knew that your phone, which is over on the counter, has got a camera that can activate at any point in time and probably does, and that it will send a kind of a clip of whatever it is that you just did to some archive somewhere and store it, well, you might feel a little bit differently about just freely enjoying that tune that came on the radio and just, expressing yourself in whatever way it was. You feel totally different about it. Maybe not. Maybe some people don't care. But just the idea that you either can or cannot have that space changes things.
Jump in here.
Yeah.
The only reason they don't care, quote unquote, care,
Nobody's judging you.
There's no consequence yet.
Right.
The only thing they care about is if there's a consequence. Oh, I got to be careful about what I say because now there's a consequence for what I say in America.
You can use your imagination in terms of consequences, suppose that database.
Imagine when thought crime or when HARPA, which, Biden discussed, DARPA, HARPA, all that ARPA stuff, right? When HARPA, the Health Advanced Research Project Agency, finally gets its legs underneath it, the way you speak to your spouse or your children may in fact be monitored and evaluated on an ongoing and consistent basis to do things like evaluate the mental state that you are currently in, that you're likely to be in 5 minutes on whatever trend or trajectory, psychological evaluations, health evaluations, etc., that then would potentially cause some action to be taken, like CPS being called or notified, the police showing up at your house. This is where privacy kind of comes into play with respect to that. So the reason why people don't care about privacy, quote unquote care, is because they think I don't have anything to hide. If they're looking at me, they got nothing to see. Who gives a shit? Well, everything I'm doing is the same thing everyone else is doing. Those really aren't good reasons. Those are excuses to not deal with the problem.
No way.
The problem is that there's
right.
consequences.
TMC.
There will be consequences, and those consequences will become severe for something trivial like saying the word fuck.
People say that, okay? They say, oh, I've got nothing to hide. You know what? I honestly, and I'll challenge anybody, I think you're lying to yourself if you say that it really doesn't matter, I don't care, I have nothing to hide. It's not the connotation of, gee, I have something to hide and it's a bad thing. It's not like that. It's just the idea that you wouldn't be able to have any private space. It's not a negative connotation to be able to have your own self space for yourself where it's just you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a weakness to decide that you want to have some private space. There's nothing weak or wrong about that at all. So I think that those who would attempt to, strength signal that, oh, well, I have nothing to hide, it's all good, you can see anything. Fine. You can say that maybe they don't have anything. I don't know. All right. But honestly, I think that there's a purpose to having that boundary between the outer and the inner sanctum. There's a purpose for it. We've had it for eons.
If people are being indefinitely detained at this point for walking through the Capitol, having no prior record,
right,
being of elderly age, geriatric for that matter, in some cases by classical definition, their mobility, you'd have to look at the specific circumstances, but nonetheless, if that can occur, indefinite detention at this point,
myriad circumstances.
Right. Because of the lack of privacy, because of the ease with which information about an individual can be obtained, collated, organized, and then made sense of with data analytics and complex, software, machine learning, all of that. Now we're talking about microphones and cameras, the stuff that everybody understands. But the inside out distinction, right, with privacy, what happens when your mind, your thoughts, your consciousness no longer is private? What happens when the systems come online, arguably they already are, that are able to monitor in real time everything that's going on with you, all of your physiology? Imagine where we're going with this desire to track and understand and measure and monitor everything. If it can be measured and monitored, it will be measured and monitored, right? Imagine where we're going with nanotechnology. Imagine where we're going with this notion of the Internet of Things and modern health.
And look how far it's going.
Right.
It's going way, way, way far, guys. Yeah.
And this is just surveillance. This isn't even like being able to consider the possibility stimulation.
Right. Stimuli. It's not even that part yet. That's right.
Applying the stimuli. That's the other end of the feedback loop, right? Or the OODA loop. You've got the feedback piece, but then you've got the stimuli. Stimulate, observe, orient, decide, act. UDA. Observe, orient, make a decision, act. Stimulate, observe.
Can we
orient.
go to Aristotle for a minute?
Do it.
Okay. So this is not, okay, what's new is the encroachment upon that private space. There's nothing new about there being private space. So, by way of history, once upon a time, Aristotle made a distinction between the public sphere of politics and political activity and the private or domestic sphere of the family, the oikos, as he determined it. Now, this is not even your inner sanctum. This is just public versus family. Okay, so know that he's not quite exactly speaking about what we were just talking about. And he called these two distinct spheres of life, a classic reference to a private domain. And then the inner layer, and I'm adding this, the inner layer of the onion to the private domain is your own space that is just inside your own mind. So the private-public discussion also sometimes is taken to refer to the appropriate realm of governmental authority as opposed to the realm reserved for self-regulation, along the lines described by John Stuart Mill in his essay on liberty. Liberty, interesting word that comes up here. Just, things to connect dots with. Furthermore, the distinction arises again in Locke's discussion of property in his second treatise on government. In the state of nature, all the world's bounty is held in common, and in that sense, it's public. But one possesses one's self and one's own body, and one can also acquire property by mixing one's labor with it. In these cases, it becomes one's private property, i.e., one's private thoughts, one's intellectual property, one's creative property, just plain one's own. Let's say you just picked up the Bible and you read it and it said something to you. Those are your thoughts. That's your spiritual relationship with your connections to the hereafter and the extended whatever you want to call it, depending on your system of belief and spirituality. Let's move on. Systematic discussion about the concept of privacy is often said to begin with, this says right to privacy. Political, social, and economic changes and a recognition of the right to be left alone. They argued that an existing law afforded a way to protect the privacy of the individual. Now, he's citing a specific article here, and if we were to read all of these, we wouldn't have time to get to everything we want to get to, so forgive me for breezing through it. The links to these are in all of your show notes. Okay, so focusing in large part on the press and publicity allowed by recent inventions, such as photography and newspapers and the internet and interconnection, human mind, body, computer interface as well nowadays, but also referring well to violations in other contexts, emphasizing the invasion of privacy brought about by public dissemination of details relating to a person's private life. These are not new issues. The thing that's new is the power, the technological power that is now at hand to make these invasions not only very deeply, but for all intents and purposes, invisibly. Now, invisibly, that's even more of a deal when you don't even know it's happening. Yeah, you trying to say something?
It's invasive. It's pervasive. It's invisible, and it allows for asymmetrical collection of information to a very, very small group of people that then are able to do whatever they want with it, ultimately monetize it, collect energy out of it, however you want to try to quantify or define energy. That's really what it's doing is that's where we're at with tech. It's allowing a very few networks, very, very few networks to collect and aggregate all kinds of highly sensitive information about everybody.
This is what's going on. This is the world that we are walking into or being led into right now. There's another little paragraph kind of gets another little facet of this too. So you can connect a lot of dots here. I mean, start right here. Urging that they were not attempting to protect the property or the material goods or the items produced or intellectual property, but to protect the peace of mind that is attained with such protection. These people said that the right to privacy was based on a principle of inviolate personality. That's you. That's like your own self, okay? Which was part of a general right of immunity of the person, the right to one's personality. So you see what we're hitting on here. The privacy principle, they believed, was already part of common. Now, this is what they're saying that they believed, but I ask you, anybody that when you watch this either now or later, do you think there's anything that's incorrect about this? The right to one's personality, the right to the privacy of one's inner personality as you muse over it yourself, as you ponder it, as you laugh to yourself, as you cry to yourself, as you theorize, as you imagine, as you work to achieve a spiritual oneness with your creator by whatever method, okay? That these rights were already part of common law. And it's almost an inner extension of this next phrase, which is the protection of one's home as one's castle. Well, it's protection of the home of one's self as one's castle. But the new technology made it important to explicitly and separately recognize this protection under the name of privacy. They suggested, go ahead.
Yeah, it's this piece right here, where it says the right to privacy was based on the principle of inviolate personality.
Inviolate personality, that's right.
The right to one's personality. Now, do you want to spend a minute on what is the right to your own personality? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, it means the right to your own thoughts. It means the right to know. It means by some means to know that your own thinking has not been silently modified by some system of.
More simply, how about this? What is the right to one's personality when you look at the Chinese model?
Oh wow!
Because I want to stay out of the brain and the intimacy of that, because there's a lot of stuff there that a lot of people need explanation of in order to really kind of go there fluidly in thought. And I don't want to turn people off on that all the time, but so everybody in America, I should say, generally looks at the Chinese social credit score model and understands that it's very unique as it relates to China. I mean, it's very, very interwoven into their entire model.
And it's highly invasive. It's highly invasive, but it's also fairly transparent. And the people there have learned that that's the way it is, and they've adapted to it.
Well, how does that different? What does that do to the right of one's personality? What does that do to that?
It's not yours. Well, maybe you can argue that it's yours, but it's only yours to the extent that you comply with the model.
It's right. You are forced into a cookie cutter personality.
Well, this gets to the thing I was thinking, that for people to know that invasion is there, that will stifle people's creativity. Even it'll stifle you. Well, you might be afraid to think a certain thing. And where does your creative thought come from? Your imagination, just something esoteric or eccentric that came into your mind that you say, well, I'm just by myself. I mean, I'm just thinking in my own head. I can conjure up these ideas and say, well, what if this and what if that? But what about knowing that there's a monitoring system in there? And you just say, well, you've got your own individual watchdog policing what you think, because someone will know what you're thinking. You gotta have a traffic cop in there.
Well, it's
making sure that you don't think the wrong way. Otherwise, there'll be a knock on the door. Yeah,
you're talking basically about something like Minority Report, where there's some technology or something that exists that is generally recognized as accurate and valid, that's able to predict behavior that
that's coming
results
too.
in action.
Right. I mean, things like predictive behavior modeling and then
Yeah.
preemptive arrest. My gosh, I didn't even do it yet. I think a million things every day. I don't do all of them.
Well, this is you want to get into like some cool techie stuff about it. When you if you were to parallel construct something, if you were a 3-letter agency, so to speak, pick one, doesn't matter, and you want to parallel construct, you look at all the data that you can gather about a situation and you put it into a model, and then you run simulations of that model, and they have tools and resources to do these kinds of things nowadays with the data aggregation and data analytics that exist. So you parallel construct based on what it is that you have access to, the information that you have access to, which goes back again to privacy. Where is that line drawn? And why FISA was set up after 9/11, et cetera. Right. This idea of being able to use these tools that have this incredibly powerful ability to invasively capture intimate detail about an individual's essence.
To such a degree. To such a degree that people would never even imagine that it's so much and so detailed and so powerful. And if they knew it, they'd get creeped out by it.
If the standard for emergency services is to be able to locate anybody within 30 seconds, right?
Yep.
Within a 10-foot proximity
of where they are. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's much tighter than that, but go on.
This is just what's currently available if you call 911, or what something like they would, if they wanted to track your cell phone and find them. What movie was it? The one with Clint Eastwood where he was, I think it was The Mule. Remember where there was an old dude and he was running drugs, trying to make some money and whatever. He was just bored, nothing to do. And he ended up, running a bunch of drugs and being a mule, hence the name of the movie, The Mule. Right. Anyway, The end of the movie, the way they ended up getting him was they got his cell phone and they triangulated him. And as soon as they placed the call, you see beep, beep, boop, boop, and all this stuff happens, and boom, they find him and they start tracking him. Well, that's real. You can read that in the FCC literature, what the minimum requirements are for what they call E911. And that is the digital version of the old telecommunication system requirements or expectations as it relates to when you pick up your old landline phone and you dial 911. How does that whole system work? Well, there's federal regulation for how all that stuff works that's governed through the FCC. They have that for wireless. They have that for digital, like if you were to plug a phone into your computer, what they call voice over internet protocol.
That's right.
Yeah. So they can do all this instantly. And that's just tracking you, like they can isolate to your phone. Now imagine being able to remotely access your device. Do you think the government can remotely access your device? Let me ask you this question. How often does an update dump onto your phone? How often are you able to? Daily. All the time, right? All the time. An update goes to your phone, or a notification or a ping or something from Facebook, from Twitter. I'm talking about an operating system update in this particular example. Where I'm going with this is you don't have a choice. At some point, that update is going to happen on your phone. You can only delay it so many times. So the point is this: your device is remotely accessible. And to what degree your device is accessible remotely and by whom is for that's for your own belief system, what you think is possible or not possible, and how you want to kind of model that in your own mind. But the surveillance accessibility is there, and the sensors at this point are very, very sensitive.
Yep. So, we're talking what once upon a time was, you pick up that old copper pair line and they'd know the address of where the line reached the point of demarcation. Now you may at that point in time have been on your home cordless phone way out in your backyard. So they'd only know where the house was, but now they know where the device is, and the device, if you're talking on it, is right in your hand. So the precision.
The new Bluetooth, they have 3-dimensional accuracy down to, I think it was 1 centimeter, or was it 10 centimeters? I'll have to look it up. But the new Bluetooth is.
I think it's 10. I think it's 10 centimeters, but that's pretty close, right? That's
3-dimensionally accurate, which means it understands trajectory or time of flight characteristics for a signal in 3-dimensional space, which is for Bluetooth, that's really remarkable. That's very, very sophisticated. So when you think about, I'm going to go off on a tangent. I got to stop.
Not really. It's all connected.
Yeah, three-dimensional. If the tracking and precision with Bluetooth, for example, is down to a few centimeters, right? What's that able to do in three-dimensional space when you've got a set of them plugged into your head?
Well,
like a set of AirPods, for example.
To a specific point.
Anyway, like I said, I'm going off, and that's where my mind went. Anyway, what else you got on the video, Indy? We digressed pretty far.
Not really not bad though. I want to go just, let me put this thing back up. I want to go just a little further down in what we were reading just to sum that up, and let me get with my thing. Here it is. Okay. And there were a few points that summarize some of this in the next little part of that article. I'm just going to go through them. Then we're going to go back to that video again. None of them are very long. I have a few of them. So, okay. We left off in this regarding that notion of the right to one's, the words that I read literally they grab my attention big time. The right to one's personality and inviolateness of it. So now it goes down a little further here. Although the first cases after the publication of their paper did not recognize a privacy right, soon the public and state and federal courts were endorsing and expanding the right to privacy. You got to wonder how this all went down the drain somewhere along the line, okay? Because post-Patriot Act and now up 20 years later beyond that, where we're at is a far cry from what people were assigning quite a bit of importance to once upon a time. So they go on. So this is historical. In an attempt to systematize and more clearly describe and define the right of privacy that was being upheld in tort law, William Prosser wrote in 1960 that what had emerged were four different types of privacy. Not claiming to provide an exact definition, admitting there might be some inconsistency, etc. He goes on to the four rather definite privacy rights. 1, intrusion upon a person's seclusion or solitude or into his or her private affairs. Okay. And reference to the discussion we were just having and, the power of the technology, you can see exactly what the state of affairs for item number 1 is right now. Okay. Now, go on to number 2, public disclosure or of embarrassing private facts about an individual. Well, okay. You can see where we've gone with that. When as soon as one interfaces on social media with any of the platforms out there, how that information can and will usually be stored and sometimes forwarded and disseminated to locations where you never had an intention of doing so. Item number 3, publicity, placing one in a false light in the private eye. Well, that happens too. I don't think that's the worst one. And then item number 4, appropriation of one's likeness for the advantage of another. Okay, well, we're talking about, we're talking about manipulation of graphics. We're talking about all sorts of things that we have the technology to do. Now, very, very powerful technology. So we see all that happening. Let me just buzz right back to, that's the wrong one. Let me buzz right back to Glenn Greenwald and let him go a little bit further. He does a great job. A lot of people that we feature on our show speak about what they know and what they have studied very articulately, and I really do like to acknowledge them. Here he goes, Glenn Greenwald.
This is the crux of the work on which I have been singularly focused for the last 16 months, the question of why privacy matters, a question that has arisen in the context of a global debate enabled by the revelations of Edward Snowden that the United States and its partners, unbeknownst to the entire world, has converted the internet, once heralded as an unprecedented tool of liberation and democratization, into an unprecedented zone of mass indiscriminate surveillance.
Yep, and that's true. None of us would be able to deny that. You know that that's true. He goes on.
There is a very common sentiment that arises in this debate, even among people who are uncomfortable with mass surveillance, which says that there's no real harm that comes from this large-scale invasion because only people who are engaged in bad acts have a reason to want to hide and to...
Okay, let's talk about that again for a second. It's something that I mentioned a little while ago. We were talking about it. And I mean, I'll just lay the gauntlet right down on the table and I'll just say, you know what? I'm not particularly a person that has anything to hide. And most people really aren't, most people aren't. It's not about that. It's about whether the whole thought process changes if you know that you don't have that. That's what it's about. And that's what's going on in our world today. He goes on.
Care about their privacy. This worldview is implicitly grounded in the proposition that there are two kinds of people in the world, good people and bad people. Bad people are those who plot terrorist attacks or who engage in violent criminality and therefore have reasons to want to hide what they're doing, have reasons to care about their privacy. But by contrast, good people are people who go to work, come home, raise their children, watch television.
Here's the problem. It's the choice of words that people use when they talk about this. They choose to use the word hide. All right. Now, hiding suggests some sort of a negative connotation, something a little bit beyond, schoolyard hide and seek. All right. It means hide because you did a bad thing. No, 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 no. That ain't it. He goes on.
Use the internet not to plot bombing attacks, but to read the news or exchange recipes or to plan their kids' Little League games. And those people are doing nothing wrong and therefore have nothing to hide and no reason to fear the government monitoring them.
All right. So TMC, I want to put it to you, and also watching the chat. Thanks to everybody for being out there with us. I want to put it to you. We're throwing the whole thing about being a bad person and having something to hide because you're going to get arrested for it. That's right out. That's off the table. That's not us. That's not what we're talking about. Okay. I ask you personally, how would it, in one world versus another one in which you knew that everything that was inside your mind was all inside that inner space versus the outside, that way of life, that way of thinking, and what inhibitions it might cause, or what maybe stresses that it might cause, or what almost a feeling of loss of something. It's almost a loss. It's almost like privacy is not about hiding. It's just something that's yours. It's what we were reading about in that definition, that if you don't have that anymore, then there's something that is, it's a personal endowment that you were born with that's taken away from you. Does this making any sense at all to you?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it is.
It's that. It's not about hiding. It's about something being stolen. Okay.
It's more than that. See, the way he presented it is you're passing over a huge issue. And the issue is this. If you have nothing to hide, like you're not doing anything wrong, in your own paradigm, what your own belief system, your own understanding of what you think is acceptable behavior versus unacceptable behavior, right? That's where you're making that decision. That's where you're making that statement from. And that may be true today. It may not be true today. Is it going to be true tomorrow?
Maybe.
It's maybe not.
Right.
And so to glaze over this idea I think that's bad, number one. But he only has a few minutes to talk on this TED thing, so I kind of get it. But for another reason, I think it's not a good thing. Think about the way you can understand information. If you were able to monitor soccer moms and t-ball teams and whatever, right? If you're able to monitor all of that stuff, what are you able to do with that information? You'll know everybody's name. You'll know all of their relationships. You'll know what they like, what they don't like. You'll know everything about them. And so, right. So you'll know how to market products and services to them. You'll know how to provide recommendations. You'll know how to turn their screws one way or the other, good or bad, basically.
Right.
And so when we look at this idea of surveillance, going back to what this guy was talking about, the internet and the U.S. government and this, that, and the other, and it's this giant surveillance apparatus. That's what it was made for. And the real root of all of this really is to understand, measure, understand, and influence control, exercise control over behavior.
Right.
It doesn't matter what
numbers.
It is, it's behavior that ultimately drives someone to do something. And so being able to understand behavior with as great a level of detail as possible, that I think is the goal. And that is what I think the internet is providing governments and corporations, for that matter, with respect to what's possible with surveillance.
Right. Right. Well, we'll come back to him in a second. We have a little, this is, we've done countless episodes on all of the actual technological ways in which this is being, exercised and implemented. So here we have a little article. This is from Psychology Today. It's not even new. It's old. Okay. Yeah, y'all remember, everything that we talk about is not what was released last week. Sometimes it's older information, few years, 10 years. This one's, many years, 14 years old. These are things that we should be thinking about. And our little thumbnail for the show tonight is a person, a human being. And there's the person and their mind and their body. And then there's the whole globe and the person's autonomy relative to the rest of the world. It's about that inner space. So I'm going to skip through a little bit of this because this was written by a psychoanalyst of some sort, and she talks a little bit about a particular engagement with a client. So I'm going to skip down into a little bit. Once again, this link is in the show notes for you. So she brings up a meeting with a particular client. And she says, well, they're physically healthy, but emotionally fragile and easily dejected. Maybe not clinically depressed, but suffering from what psychologists call a mild, low-level pervasive depression, which saps life of its beauty, even as one continues to fully function. And we see a whole lot of people today continuing to fully function, but there's just something, it's nagging at me about the power of this invasiveness. I don't know if it's nagging at you, and I think that something should be done about it. So she goes on, the problem may lie in frayed connections to friends, relatives, coworkers, and tens or hundreds of thousands of strangers that we pass by every day. Being very busy with busy schedules and many affiliations that provide ties that are just rather illusory. People experience dissonance because they are in the company of others who are not truly connected to them. Interesting thing to ponder. In contrast, most of our ancestors probably sat and talked and worked in very close proximity to family and friends, and out of necessity, albeit. But can you imagine if at work, if you hugged your coworkers several times a day, or seeing the same dozen people from sunrise to sunset every day? Because our ancestors lived in close contact with one another in their communities, protecting one's individuality and privacy became something paramount. So it became part of what was normal human behavioral evolution, if you will. The paradox is that in a world teeming with anonymous faces, the privacy that we crave is in easy supply. And then when we attain it, we're at the risk of slipping into detachment. So you see, what's going on is a couple of things at the same time. You may not be physically alone throughout the day, but you're probably not always interacting in a meaningful way with the people around you, even people that we see regularly. And then we get into this notion of the way that we communicate electronically, and there's a certain amount of virtuality to that. And not going to go too far off into the weeds here on this. As evolutionary psychologists point out, humans developed in tight tribes. People were aloof when necessary and when they were actively rejecting one another. Hence, the ping of irritation that we feel when an email goes unanswered or a phone call is ignored. And I'm skipping down a little bit further. We evolved to fear strangers, but also perhaps to crave brief periods of separation from others. As a species, we trekked out of Africa or wherever we trekked out of, splintering into clans of 30 to 150 people. Our ancestors were surrounded by kith and kin. Imagine a multi-generational family reunion every day in your life. We arrive now at the 21st century as profoundly social beings who risk severing their own lifeline. With the exception of parent-child and romantic relationships, we no longer hug, kiss, and hold each other for warmth, protection, or reassurances. Our interactions have become vastly more sanitized. And TMC, I would maybe suggest, in the evolution of our interactions becoming more sanitized, that's leaving a space for something of an electronically oriented, computer-driven nature to fill the void. Hence, people, engage with their devices. And what that device can do, if it's able to make a connection to our thought process, is a place that's now not quite occupied. There's sort of an opening there for it to fill a space. Technology today encourages us to further segregate ourselves. We excel at creating isolation in social settings. We spend time at the health club and say, coddled in a private cocoon of sound. Technology tricks us into thinking we're more connected than we are. But once again, what that's leaving is that little void, because we need both. We need the private space, and we need to be in charge of when we make that liaison, that connection out into the outer world, and when we're turning to the inner world.
You got to finish that sentence.
What? Sorry. Say again. Go ahead.
You got to finish the sentence. It's so huge. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Technology even tricks us into thinking that we're more connected than we are. We believe that we know people on TV and radio and view them as friends. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of not like that.
This is a huge issue, I think. And
the whole thing is about it really comes down to control. It's about whether you're fully in control of when you choose to be in inner mode and what's inside that inner mode versus what's on the outer mode. The blurring of that line, and at the same time, people having evolved now today into what seems to be a lot of people around, but not a whole lot of connection. All right, a lot of people around. So that's leaving a void in people's psyche. And what's going to fill it? Technology. And what has been filling it? Exactly this. People that they believe that they've actually gotten to know people on TV and radio and view them as friends, because there's a little bit of a void there because of the impersonal and superficial nature of a lot of the communications that we're having in real life, in tangible, going out into the outside world. There's a little bit more distance between people. This is leaving a potential opportunity to be exploited inside the human psyche. I'm going to go to another one. I may not pick the right one. Okay, yeah, this is the one I wanted. Now, this is a summary, just for everybody to just load this into your mental computer about privacy. Various types of privacy behaviors are engaged, and they go ahead and they categorize them. They divided it up into 6 types. Now, anybody that comes up with a specific number of types, I always say, okay, that was your formulation of them. Maybe it was 6, maybe it's 4. You, as you listen and watch this, you might come up with a few others, or you might merge 2 of them together. Anyway, they came up with 6 types of privacy: solitude, isolation, anonymity, reserve, intimacy with friends, intimacy with family. And then if I were to shut off the privacy altogether, I would say, well, it's just me out there in the world, and I am, in an extroverted sense, just sharing everything that I think with everybody around me. That would be just shutting off all the privacy altogether. And then they go on to tell a little bit how they did this study. And I have the whole PDF, but I don't think we're going to go there. Okay, here we go. There were commonality and uniqueness of the factors across the 6 kinds of privacy that they came up with. Factors were contemplation. These are important. Autonomy, rejuvenation, confiding, creativity, disapproved consumptions. I don't know exactly what they mean by that. Recovery, okay, sort of
disapproved consumptions.
What is that?
Pedophilia.
Oh, gosh. Okay, there's a good example. Recovery. Now, think of these things that happen when one is in some of the psychological functions of privacy. Okay, these are important. So what happens if we just grow into a world in which that doesn't exist anymore? Well, then, if you need a little bit of recovery, you maybe have a hard time getting it, especially if you want to just, you've had let's say a draining day, and you just want to go to your room, and you just want to retreat into your own thoughts, and you know that you're not alone. You know that, well, you could leave the phone outside the room, okay? You could shut off all of the technology. Maybe you could do that. But what if it was on board somehow, all right? And knowing that that's always there, knowing that there are more and more TV cameras everywhere than there ever were before, you can't hardly go anywhere without being photographed anymore. Anyway, I digress, but I'm going to go on, continue digressing. So catharsis, okay, that's a healing process. Concealment. I just want to be by myself. I just want to just be just alone. There are people who's not so much me. I'm a little more extroverted, but there are people I know who are perfectly fine people. And, sometimes they say, I just want to be alone, maybe with their knitting or looking at their aquarium or watching their pet turtle crawl around on the terraformed landscape they made for them. I'm going to go through these again. Some of the things that happen in privacy, very, very important. What if we could not have this? Contemplation, autonomy, that's a big one. And then the healing side, the rejuvenation, the catharsis, and the recovery. Anyway, just some pretty important little things there. Now, I'm going to go back to Glenn, if nobody minds. He's going to go on. Anything to add right now, or go back to Glenn for a bit here?
No, just I guess to reinforce this, the importance of privacy and what it means to your mental health.
Right.
It's a huge, that's all.
Yep. Okay. Here goes Glenn. I have a couple of others too. We're halfway through. If we keep moving, we can get to more.
The people who are actually saying that are engaged in a very extreme act of self-deprecation. What they're really saying is, I have agreed to make myself such a harmless and unthreatening and uninteresting person that I actually don't fear having the government know what it is that I'm doing.
So what if, now I'm going to leave the dangerous thoughts and the dark thoughts out of it, but what if only when you are in the privacy of your own space and knowing that you're in that own space, would you dare to let your imagination run wild and perhaps your creativity run wild, because nobody's going to be judging you, and you'd come up with some thought for some sort of a contraption? I mean, if you're me and you're a gadgety guy, some sort of a contraption that was just ludicrously crazy, but you can think it, okay? But if you knew that that was being evaluated by people who were going to rate your engineering IQ based on whether your ideas are streamlined, sensible, and economical, you would never think that, because you'd say, well, gee, if I want to get that good engineering job and my thought has just been read and cataloged, and they see this albatross of a kludge that I just invented in my mind, they'd say, well, we're never going to hire that engineer. You can let your mind run into all the possible scenarios of how these invasions in this category can thwart or inhibit creativity drastically. That's just creativity. That's not even the other things we were talking about. He goes on.
This mindset has found what I think is its purest expression in a 2009 interview with the longtime CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, who, when asked about all the different ways his company is causing invasions of privacy for hundreds of millions of people around the world, said this. He said, if you're doing something that you don't want other people to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Okay. What does that presuppose? You see what he said, that Schmidt said. That assumes something. It puts a negative spin on the idea that if you're thinking or doing something that you wouldn't want other people to know, that just by virtue of the fact that you wouldn't want other people to know it, you shouldn't do it. Now, there are plenty of things that I will do in my own privacy that I wouldn't want other people to see that I should still do. I'll give you a really crazy example. Popping a zit, okay? I really don't want everybody to see that, but if I get one, I got to do it, okay? Simple things. How many examples can you come up with, not to get too personal, of so many things that you have every legitimacy to do, either with your own body hygiene or whatever, or in your own mind, that you have every complete right to be able to do and think, but they're not for other people. Am I wrong here? Am I missing something? What are you guys saying out in the chat? TMC, I'm counting on you, brother. What are you thinking?
I think these are the things that
he's putting a false statement forward and trying to make people think it's correct. It's not.
Well, he's generalizing in order to.
He's equating private to bad.
He's controlling the entire paradigm with his talk.
He's trying
you have to see exactly and only his paradigm, I guess, to exclusively go down his flow. And I agree with you, Indy. I think there are major components that he's not acknowledging with respect to privacy, and it really has to do with mental health. But
based on what he said, that statement's, well, if you're doing something you wouldn't want other people to know what you were thinking or see you doing, then maybe you shouldn't do it. Doesn't that show how people have bought that hook, line, and sinker? Because how many people, I've personally heard people say, well, I have nothing to hide, right? But,
it makes the idea of having an idea dangerous.
They drank the Kool-Aid, okay? And you know what else? These are good people. They're not dumb people. They're nice people, okay, friends? They're not dumb people. The thing is, they bought that. They drank the Kool-Aid, and they didn't get it. They missed something. Really, So, how does this relate to our cyberhuman future? Well, all sorts of stuff is out there that's going to take away that private space, okay? In the example of my dealing with acne, which mostly I grew out of, I can just know that if my phone is on the table and I deal with that little thing there that's got to be dealt with, you pop the zit, okay? That's going to be archived forever, all right? And with the fine granularity of the imaging of it, they may even be able to tell what came out when I popped it, Gee, goodness gracious. That's nobody's darn business. I don't mind, but it's just dumb. And it takes away something that is a person's private autonomy. Okay, let's see what else he has to say here.
Now, there's all kinds of things to say about that mentality. The first of which is that the people who say that privacy isn't really important, they don't actually believe it. And the way you know that they don't actually believe it is that while they say with their words that privacy doesn't matter, with their actions they take all kinds of steps to safeguard their privacy. They put passwords on their email and their social media accounts. They put locks on their bedroom and bathroom doors, all steps designed to prevent other people from entering what they consider their private realm and knowing what it is that they don't want other people to know. The very same Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, ordered his employees at Google to cease speaking with the online internet magazine CNET after CNET published an article full of personal, private information about Eric Schmidt, which it obtained exclusively through Google searches and using other Google products. This same division can be seen with the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who in an infamous interview in 2010 pronounced that privacy is no longer a, quote, social norm.
Okay. I could say a lot of things. I'm not going to.
Last year, Mark Zuckerberg and his new wife purchased not only their own house, but also all 4 adjacent houses in Palo Alto for a total of $30 million in order to ensure that they enjoyed a zone of privacy that prevented other people from monitoring what they do in their personal lives. Over the last 16 months, as I've debated this issue around the world, every single time somebody has said to me, I don't really worry about invasions of privacy because I don't have anything to hide, I always say the same thing to them. I get out a pen, I write down my email address, I say, here's my email address. What I want you to do when you get home is email me the passwords to all of your email accounts. Not just the nice, respectable work one in your name, but all of them. Because I want to be able to just troll through what it is you're doing online, read what I want to read, and publish whatever I find interesting. After all, if you're not a bad person, if you're doing nothing wrong, you should have nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying a word. I'm just listening. Right on, Valerie, out there. I see what you wrote. Yep. Coercion of opinion. Yep. And what alarms me is how trainable people are and how they latch on to these fallacies and they really believe them. And there are many, we won't say things that are going to wind up getting our video taken down or our channel banned, but there are a whole lot of fallacies that people have latched onto in current day that they really should rethink critically in their own selves, inside, not listening to the news. No. Not pulling your opinion from the Eric Schmidts or whoever the latest TV journalist. No. In your own mind, just evaluate in your own space. That's the value of having your own space. He goes on.
Not a single person has taken me up on that offer. I check that email account religiously all the time. It's a very desolate place. And there's a reason for that, which is that we as human beings, even those of us who in words disclaim the importance of our own privacy, instinctively understand the profound importance of it. It is true that as human beings we're social animals, which means we have a need for other people to know what we're doing and saying and thinking, which is why we voluntarily publish information about ourselves online. But equally essential to what it means to be a free and fulfilled human being is to have a place that we can go and be free of the judgmental eyes of other people.
Well, he just said what you said. Right? Right. Private space. Yep. I think we might come back to him. Got some more things that we could really get into it. I got one here. Oh, do we want to... TMC, do you want to have discussion, or would you like to go to another video, or would you like to get into this thing here, the social psychology of privacy? Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, that guy, I was interested in what that guy was saying. He was kind of starting to get to some of the things that we were digressing about. So when I listen to this tomorrow, Aaron, and on BSB,
your wish is my command. It's not that long. Let's let him go a little further.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we seek that out, and that reason is that all of us, not just terrorists and criminals, all of us have things to hide. There are all sorts of things that we do and think that we're willing to tell our physician or our lawyer or our psychologist or our spouse or our best friend that we would be mortified for the rest of the world to learn. We make judgments every single day about the kinds of things that we say and think and do that we're willing to have other people know, and the kinds of things that we say and think and do that we don't want anyone else to know about. People can very easily in words claim that they don't value their privacy, but their actions negate the authenticity of that belief.
And the thing is, it is somehow certain people in leadership and influential positions have made us believe that there's something bad about having that boundary, that line between the two.
Now, there's a reason why privacy is so craved universally and instinctively. It isn't just a reflexive movement like breathing air or drinking water. The reason is that when we're in a state where we can be monitored, where we can be watched, our behavior changes dramatically. The range of behavioral options that we consider when we think we're being watched severely reduce. This is just a fact of human nature that has been recognized in social science and in literature and in religion and in virtually every field of discipline. There are dozens of psychological studies that prove that when somebody knows that they might be watched, the behavior they engage in is vastly more conformist and compliant. Human shame.
Hold it right there. I'm not going to say a word. You can if you want, but okay. Were you talking about China? Were we talking about the myriad examples that we've given of the ability to monitor your behavior, to be seen, to be listened to? Goodness gracious. I mean, I don't want to pick on smartphones too much. I mean, the new phones are really great, I might even get one someday. But really, when you've got that thing with you that is able to eavesdrop, to monitor, and to image, like everything that you're doing, there's a lot that I could say. I think we'd rather continue to let Glenn Greenwald speak.
Is a very powerful motivator, as is the desire to avoid it. And that's the reason why people, when they're in a state of being watched, make decisions not that are the byproduct of their own agency, but that are about the expectations that others have of them or the mandates of societal orthodoxy. This realization was exploited most powerfully for pragmatic ends by the 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who set out to resolve an important problem ushered in by the industrial age, where for the first time institutions had become so large and centralized that they were no longer able to monitor and therefore control each one of their individual members. And the solution that he devised was an architectural design originally intended to be implemented in prisons that he called the panopticon. The primary attribute of which was the construction of an enormous tower in the center of the institution, where whoever controlled the institution could at any moment watch any of the inmates, although they couldn't watch all of them at all times. And crucial to this design was that the inmates could not actually see into the panopticon,
Isn't that, TMC, isn't that a word that you used a number of times in one of the shows from, it's got to be a year ago, a long time ago? The evolution and the advent of the implemented panopticon, which essentially is what is being created around us and that we're living in now.
To the tower, and so they never knew if they were being watched or even when. And what made him so excited about this discovery was that would mean that the prisoners would have to assume that they were being watched at any given moment, which would be the ultimate enforcer for obedience and compliance. The 20th century...
You don't have to think very hard to see what has happened, how society has been molded, and it's been molded little by little, but the rate at which it's being molded seems to have accelerated over the last, I'm going to say, 20 years, maybe a little less.
French philosopher Michel Foucault and compliance. The 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault realized that that model could be used not just for prisons, but for every institution that seeks to control human behavior: schools, hospitals, factories, workplaces. And what he said was that this mindset, this framework discovered by Bentham, was the key means of societal control for modern Western societies, which no longer need the overt weapons of tyranny, punishing or imprisoning or killing dissidents, or legally compelling loyalty to a particular party, because mass surveillance creates a prison in the mind that is a much more subtle, though much more effective means of fostering compliance with social norms or with social orthodoxy, much more effective than brute force could ever be. The most iconic work of literature about surveillance and privacy is the George Orwell novel 1984, which we all learn in school, and therefore it's almost become a cliche. In fact, whenever you bring it up in a debate about surveillance, people instantaneously dismiss it as inapplicable. And what they say is, oh, well, in 1984, there were monitors in people's homes. They were being watched at every given moment, and that has nothing to do with the surveillance state that we face.
Why not? Why doesn't it?
Because they're wrong. Stupid.
They don't see it. It's because it's been implemented so slowly and with so many seductive conveniences along the way that people can't live without it, actually.
It's exactly the right word. Or phraseology, seductive conveniences, because that is exactly the underlying reasons why it's so easy to just accept the slow encroachment that you're speaking of.
Yep. He goes on. He's hitting some stellar points here.
That is an actual fundamental misapprehension of the warnings that Orwell issued in 1984. The warning that he was issuing was about a surveillance state, not that monitored everybody at all times, but where people were aware that they could be monitored at any given moment. Here is how Orwell's narrator, Winston Smith, described the surveillance system that they faced. Quote, "There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment." He went on to say, "At any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement scrutinized." The Abrahamic religions similarly posit that there's an invisible, all-knowing authority who, because of its omniscience, always watches whatever you're doing, which means you never have a private moment. The ultimate enforcer for...
I just stop it there. Guys, you're living in it today, right now. And if it's not fully there, it's getting there. I don't even know what the definition of full would be. Why do we do these shows on this channel, Cyberhuman Frontiers? There are some good things about technology, but more often than not, when technology advances and produces one good thing, it creates one bad issue that has to be dealt with at the same time. We have a long-term mission on this channel, and that is to make a compelling argument for exactly what Glenn Greenwald is talking about. Okay, a compelling argument for caution, if not caution, even if there were a way to gain further control over these technologies. There are elements of what it is to be a human being that are of a spiritual nature. They're higher nature, vastly more important and very much more rooted in what we are as human beings, that are so much more important than anything that technology can ever produce. Yet, look what we've been sacrificing little by little with technology. Now, we're just highlighting one thing tonight, just one thing. Under that title of the psychology of privacy, we're just trying to try to redefine, to try to re-illustrate and illuminate that separation between the inner space and the outer space. This is just one thing covering tonight. Over many, many episodes, we've detailed so many different ways in which, I'll take one example, and it's in humaninternet.org. We could put it up now, but we're going to run short on time eventually. You can be imaged through a wall, okay, by current technology right now. Your body can be mapped before you walk behind that wall so that they've got a loaded image. It can be animated. And then when you walk behind that wall, 5G signals and other frequencies of an electromagnetic nature can radar image you through a wall. And it's kind of not apparent to you, right? But it can be done. It is being done. It's been tested. We've shown it. We've shown it. That's not even getting into the realm of invasion of genetic code. That was something that we actually covered that for a number of episodes over, I think, maybe about the last 4. So we're making a compelling argument that this is real, and we're showing you specifically who's doing it, what they're doing, and what their alliances and allegiances are, and what their likely motivations are. And this ultimately, without getting our channel banned, this ultimately turns into, 1, a call to action, and number 2, a kind of an inspiration to reach to a higher spiritual level, because that's kind of, that's an important part of us. And that in one way, I think that is our ultimate destiny, to evolve spiritually. Anyway, just trying to put it all in perspective for you. Glenn is going to go on. He's got only a couple minutes left here.
Obedience to its dictates. What all of these seemingly disparate works recognize, the conclusion that they all reach, is that a society in which people can be monitored at all times is a society that breeds conformity and obedience and submission, which is why every tyrant, the most overt to the most subtle, craves that system. Conversely, even more importantly, it is a realm of privacy, the ability to go somewhere where we can think and reason and interact and speak without the judgmental eyes of others being cast upon us, in which creativity and exploration and dissent exclusively reside. And that is the reason why, when we allow a society to exist in which we're subject to constant monitoring, we allow the essence of human freedom to be severely crippled.
There was a comment out in the chat that I thought was particularly apropos, which is, you have the right to remain silent. Everything you say will be held against you, especially if it's the truth. And once again, you can let your imagination go with that too. Keep the comments coming, guys. We're watching.
The last point I want to observe about this mindset, the idea that only people who are doing nothing wrong have things to hide and therefore reasons to care about privacy, is that it entrenches 2 very destructive messages, 2 destructive lessons. The first of which is that the only people who care about privacy, the only people who will seek out privacy, are by definition bad people.
Which is wrong. That's a fallacy. He goes on.
This is a conclusion that we should have all kinds of reasons for avoiding. The most important of which is that when you say somebody who's doing bad things, you probably mean things like plotting a terrorist attack or engaging in violent criminality, a much narrower conception of what people who wield power mean when they say doing bad things. For them, doing bad things typically means doing something that poses meaningful challenges to the exercise of our own power. The other really destructive and I think even more insidious lesson that comes from accepting this mindset is there's an implicit bargain that people who accept this mindset have accepted. And that bargain is this: if you're willing to render yourself sufficiently harmless, sufficiently unthreatening to those who wield political power, then and only then can you be free of the dangers of surveillance. It's only those who are dissidents, who challenge power, who have something to worry about. There are all kinds of reasons why we should want to avoid that lesson as well. You may be a person who right now doesn't want to engage in that behavior, but at some point in the future you might. Even if you're somebody who decides you never want to, The fact that there are other people who are willing to and able to resist and be adversarial to those in power, dissidents and journalists and activists and a whole range of others, is something that brings us all collective good that we should want to preserve. Equally critical is that the measure of how free a society is not how it treats its good, obedient, compliant citizens, but how it treats its dissidents and those who resist orthodoxy. But the most important reason is that a system of mass surveillance suppresses our own freedom in all sorts of ways. It renders off limits all kinds of behavioral choices without our even knowing that it's happened.
Ah, invisibly. Ubiquitously. Seductively. Because you want all that stuff. You want those gadgets. You can't have it both ways, though. That's the problem. You can't have the good without the bad. He goes on.
The renowned socialist activist Rosa Luxemburg once said, "He who does not move does not notice his chains." We can try and render the chains of mass surveillance invisible or undetectable, but the constraints that it imposes on us do not become any less potent. Thank you very much.
Wow. Cool stuff. You know, this show is for your entertainment. We seek to entertain. You may smile. You may think. You may ponder. I mean, part of it is to encourage the interchange of thoughts with us and other like-minded individuals curious about the subject at hand. Well, I'm going to move on to, let me find it here. What are you thinking, TMC? What are you thinking right now? I know what I'm thinking.
I think that was a really good TED Talk. I want to go back and watch it again, actually. Nonetheless, I know you had some other documents.
So we can get a little bit brainy now. We can get into some of what some people have written. We've got a few minutes left. And oh, wait a minute. Before I put this back up, let me check out. Well, okay. I got a little video from a guy who's been in a tech company, and I think I could play a couple minutes of that. I got this one right here. This is the same, a very similar perspective from another individual from a completely different walk of life, it seems. And I'm going to put this up. This is rather short, and I'll probably just let the whole thing go. And I know that this is getting, all you guys who watch this thing, I know this is getting you thinking. I know it is, and that is good. Okay. So this is, and once again, this is in your show notes. This is by a guy named Yumi Izumi, and it's short, and it's Why Privacy Matters. Here we go. Thank you, TEDx.
Do you ever lock your door? Do you have a passcode on your phone? That is to protect your privacy. And privacy should be a fundamental human right. For me, privacy means to have control over what information goes out for me. For example, if I were to message one of my friends, that message should be only read by us, unless we decide to share. However, when I don't have the right to privacy and I can't protect my privacy, I feel being watched, like I'm being monitored. Ash's conformity study has shown that when people are being watched, they change their behavior. For example, if I were with my friends who doesn't take privacy very seriously, I will not talk about privacy in depth because I could be made fun of for thinking that privacy is so important. If I was always being watched, I wouldn't be able to do what I actually want to do. But it is really important that I am able to do what I am.
If you were always being watched, if he was always, he wouldn't be able to do what he always wants to do. Well, that doesn't mean that what he wants to do just because he's not being watched is somehow harmful or wrong or bad. It's just what it is. It's just, and this is the same thing being said by someone from probably a completely different place, completely different walk of life. And we all know it. We all know it. But what we got to get to is we got to get to the point of what we need to do if we can even rein this all back in, because it is changing. It is fundamentally redesigning the way that human interactive life is taking place. And it's a big deal. And it all ends up coming down to one thing: sacrifice of personal freedom, creativity, psychological health, and control. He goes on. It's actually a third done now.
What I actually want to do, because it is about being myself and doing what I actually want to do and expressing my true self. If I can't do this, I am just a robot to society that is just following the orders of the majority. 4 years ago, I watched a film called Snowden. This film shocked me. This film was about how Edward Snowden, a CIA former agent, exposed the surveillance system the US government had. A surveillance system is a monitoring system. This system was collecting information from cameras and microphones everywhere. Tens of millions of phone calls, including yours, were being recorded without your consent. They were doing this secretly. Finally, just a few months ago, after 7 years of exposure, this system was determined illegal by the Federal Appeal Court. Despite this, Snowden is still in Russia, running away from the US government, who is trying to punish him for exposing this system. But he saved and protected our privacy. Do you want your conversations to be recorded? Do you want everything you say, everything you do, everyone you talk to, and every expression of creativity, love, or friendship to be recorded? Well, I don't. And
I'm just going to stop it right there and really give a hand to this guy. Being an old person, I really find it very encouraging when young minds can sum things up and have a kind of a really comprehensive picture of things, and they know what the right values are. They know what's important. That really makes me happy. So I take heart when I hear younger minds explaining thoughts in this way. And okay, he's going to finish.
that is why I value privacy. After watching the film, I researched more into privacy. Then I found out that companies like Google and Facebook were using our data to make profit. Their business model is to sell us, to sell our data. We are the product of these companies, not their advertisements, nor their services. It's us. To make you click on ads, they track you. They take a record of what your interests are. Then they change what you see when you browse so that there's a higher chance that you will click on them. They will most likely show you content that you already support because there's a higher chance that you will click on them. If these services that track us show us content that you already know, we will not be introduced to anything new. If we are not introduced to anything new, we will not be able to learn anything. Therefore, our knowledge will stop where we are right now. Therefore, no growth will be possible.
See what points he's hitting on will be stopped where we are, and it inhibits growth. Inhibition of creativity, inhibition of growth, inhibition of freedom. Yeah. Well, that's the deal that you're making. That's the bargain that you're making when you support the use of these technologies and these big companies that are providing these such attractive services to you. That's the deal that's being made. But it doesn't look like that right on the face of it, does it? but that is what it is.
Individually and as a whole. Many people say, maybe including you, that they don't care about privacy because they don't have nothing to hide, because they have nothing to hide. However, as Snowden said, privacy isn't about something to hide. It's about something to protect. If you don't care about your privacy, it's like screaming out your home address or browsing history in public. Even if you don't do bad acts, even if you aren't a terrorist, a criminal, or a hacker, or anyone doing bad things, you should care about your privacy. Because it is about being yourself and doing what you actually want to do. If you don't want to be the product of these companies and be tracked by these governments, you should start caring about your privacy so that you can truly be yourself and grow as you, not the conditioned you. Thank you.
Hats off to you, Yumi Izumi. Good job, man. Good job. Really. He doesn't speak with a whole lot of flowery Ivy League school words. He just gets the point across, and he knows it. He understands. So good. So good. Yep. Well, we have an old article here, and this is a little bit along the lines of, I'm gonna move down here, right to here. TMC, you still with me?
Yeah, Indy, I'm still here.
I got this little paragraph right here. We don't have that much time left, but once again, this will spawn more conversation. The group preserving functions of privacy. We've kind of angled in on this from a number of different directions, talking about now that inner mode. And this is kind of what I hadn't read this before I wrote the headliner for the show here, but it kind of is something I wanted to get to. And let's let someone who's got some background in it state it better than I probably would. Withdrawal into privacy often means the making of life with an unbearable person possible. You got to back off from them for a while. You can tolerate a certain situation or a certain environment, however stressful it might be, for a period of time, and then you got to go recharge your batteries. So inner space, outer world, inner space. If the distraction and relief of privacy were not available, then not only would some relationships, but some situations become intolerable and could end up being terminated if there was no other way to avoid the conflict. Excessive contact is a condition under which Freud's principle of ambivalence most clearly expresses himself. I don't know if I agree with everything Freud said, but this might be interesting. When intimacy, clearly exercises itself, when intimacy is most likely to produce open hostility as well as affection. The interaction with other people is going to kind of push things in one direction or another, either a bonding together or a repulsive force. But where you can get to normalize that is by going back into your own individual space again. Now I'm going to move on because we only have so much time here. In fact, let me open this up so that you're not getting dizzy while I scroll. Okay. Guarantees of privacy, that is, rules as to who may and who may not observe or reveal information about whom, must be established in any stable social system. So, 3 words there, a stable social system. So we would probably all like to see our social system either be or reclaim or to become stable and stay that way. We might like that. Okay. Guarantees of privacy are required in order for that stable system to persist. If these assurances do not prevail, if there is normlessness with respect to privacy, every withdrawal from visibility may be accompanied by a measure of espionage. For without rules to the contrary, persons are naturally given to intrude upon invisibility. Well, that's a whole lot of words that, in my opinion, we didn't need to say, but that's okay. I give respect to the author. Secrecy sets barriers between people, but at the same time offers the temptations to break through the barriers. So he's talking about human behavior. He's talking about that either whether it's big tech that wants to do it or just somebody else, just an individual. So we have phenomena such as the peeping Tom, the eavesdropper, and the like, which are some of the symbols of it. Surveillance is a term which is generally applied to institutionalized intrusions into privacy. And social systems are characterizable in terms of the tension that exists between the surveillant and the anti-surveillant modes. And now he goes on to cite George Orwell again. It depicts the malfunctions that occurred in situations of excessive surveillance. Anyway, now I'm going to go on here to another little section. Right here. It is well known that privacy both reflects and helps maintain status divisions between groups. In armed forces, non-commissioned officers may reside in the same building as the dormitoried enlisted men, but he will maintain a separate room. The officer of higher rank, and he's going through a whole lot of examples of how there are all these really going on to help to explain our whole thing here is that there are reasons why there are separations between either groups or individuals and the outside. All right. Privacy, a luxury. Wow, look at that. Essayist Phyllis McGinley wrote, "The poor might have to huddle together in cities for the sake of need. The frontiersman cling to his neighbor for the sake of protection. But in each civilization, as it is advanced, those who could afford it chose the luxury of a withdrawing place, privacy. Egyptians planned vineyard-hung gardens. The Greeks had their porticos, and seaside villas. The Romans put enclosures around their patios. Privacy was considered worth striving for." Okay, well, I guess, it's making the case that there's a reason for it. Let me look for something else here. How many minutes do we have left? Not many. I might wrap up with another little video here. I don't think that we need to drive the point home about how tech is doing what it does. So let me put the share back up. TMC, any thoughts that you may have at the moment?
No, I'm curious if we're going to stay on surveillance or not. I mean, it's been a number of months at this point since we talked about it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we are the architects of the steerage of this ship, the ship of cyberhuman frontiers. So we'll figure that out. So this guy works for, he's worked in a tech company, and I do have the link to this down in the show notes, and I would encourage you to get at least the first few minutes of this. But there's another one, not that one. There's another one. Yep, this one right here. Okay, so what your digital footprint, and this is from a year ago, psychological targeting, what your digital footprints reveal about you. Okay, this is Sandra Matz. Here she goes.
However, what we do know is that the technology of psychological targeting exists and that more and more companies are using it. And I know that because I get emails almost every single day from people who either want to start a business in that context or who want to use psychological targeting within their own organization. So instead of wasting my time on Cambridge Analytica, what I want to do is demystify psychological targeting for you by doing 3 things. I want to explain how psychological targeting works, how effective it is, and most importantly, think with you about how we as a society might want to use it. Because the reason I'm doing this research is not because I want to help companies squeeze every last penny out of their customers. It's because we truly have to understand, we have to develop an objective and scientific understanding of psychological targeting if we want to engage policymakers, business leaders, and frankly, everybody who's willing to listen in a conversation on how to manage it effectively.
Wow. Engage business leaders? I don't think they even want to listen to us. I think it's gone to another stage, but that's just my opinion. She goes on.
You're missing it.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's thinking of it, being able to manipulate those people because those are people in positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of the science, because if you can manipulate people in positions of power, then you control the masses. So control the few to control the many, one ring to rule them all, kind of a thing.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Good point.
Okay, so how does psychological targeting work? Which essentially boils down to the question of how can we assess the psychology of millions of people in order to target them with personalized ads. And up to a few years ago, the only way we could measure psychological traits was using questionnaires like this one here, where we'd essentially ask people to tell us how much they agree with different statements, and then based on their responses, we would conclude that they're more extroverted, for example, or more introverted. And this works perfectly well in the context of a research study where you survey a few hundred people, but you can imagine that there's just no way that you can get millions of people complete one of these questionnaires for 10 to 20 minutes before you show them the right ad. So the question is really, if we can't ask people directly, how else can we indirectly glean their psychological characteristics? And the answer is this. We look at their digital footprint. And what I mean by that are all the traces that you leave online on a daily basis. It's what you share and like on Facebook. It's the cookies that keep track of the websites you visit. It's what you post on Twitter, what you buy with your credit card, all the way to what you listen to on Spotify. And you can imagine that all these traces combined can actually tell us a lot about your habits, your preferences, your needs, essentially who you are as a person. So what can we learn about people's psychology by looking at these digital footprints? And I'm just going to show you a few simple but very powerful examples from research of my colleagues and myself in the context of Facebook. Well, you have to trust me that we can get similar insights from pretty much any type of digital footprint that's out there. Okay, so what you see here are the words in people's Facebook posts that are most strongly related to having an extroverted personality. So a tendency to be outgoing and social. And you can see extroverts, they talk about parties, weekends, girls, exciting, so all the fun and exciting stuff that you do with friends. Now, if you contrast that to the words that are most strongly related with having an introverted personality, so it's quiet, you can see that the picture looks very different. So introverts talk about internet, anime, manga, computer, all the stuff that you typically do by yourself. Now, the next one is one of my favorites. It's the words that are most strongly associated with having an agreeable personality, which is a tendency to be caring and trusting. And you can see agreeable people talk about blessed, Thanksgiving, wonderful, so there's this warm glow to it. A word of warning, the word cloud for people who have a disagreeable personality, which means that they're more critical and competitive, looks very different. And we're not cherry picking. So you can do the same thing for the Facebook pages that people can like and follow. And you can see the picture is, again, very intuitive. But most importantly, these very simple relationships between someone's digital footprints and their psychology is all we need to actually apply psychological targeting using existing targeting tools. Because what Facebook, for example, allows you to do is target people not only based on socio-demographic variables like age, gender, location, but also based on interests. And because interests are
All stuff we know, right? We all know that this goes on. And she's just driving that point home and illustrating it. And there you go.
inherently related to psychological traits, Facebook effectively also allows you to target people or audiences of different psychological profiles. Now that brings us to the second question. Like, can we really influence people's behavior by targeting them based on their psychological profile? Is psychological targeting really effective? And the answer is yes. And I'm just going to show you the results of one of my studies, but we've tested this in many different contexts, and the results are always very similar. So in this particular case, we teamed up with a beauty retailer in the UK, and we advertised their online store. So our goal was to get women to click on an ad, go to the store, and then purchase something. And we created extroverted ads and introverted ads. So the extroverted ads looked like this one here. There were several people having a good time, really playing with the need of extroverts to socialize and to be the center of attention. The introverted ads look different. It was like usually one person in front of the mirror, getting or playing with the need of introverts to have some quiet time for themselves. We then advertised all of the ads to both extroverted and introverted audiences on Facebook using this interest-based targeting functionality that I showed you before. And we measured.
I think you get the drift of where she's going. She's going to tell you how successful their methodology was. So there you are. They, and when I say they, I'm talking about pretty much everything that you do in interacting by way of your electronic devices is now representing an encroachment into your privacy. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, it's really something that's part of not only what it almost seems like a fundamental right of a human being to have that private space. It might be more valuable to an introverted person than to an extroverted person, granted, but it has a function. That freedom of choice to either be with your own self and just one-on-one with you inside versus what's outside. And it's not a bad thing. It's something that is, I believe, is a fundamental aspect of psychological health and balance. And we've got a lot to think about. I would encourage you to do a little bit of reading and watch more of these video links that we put in our notes below the show. And TMC, I want to turn it over to you for last words on this one. We're just about at that hour and minute.
I had a great time, Indy. I think the videos were great. I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a team working together. So, all right. Okay, everybody. We'll bring it again. As you can tell, we're always giving you something different every week. So, if you want to follow up on this in any way, please feel free to do so. Have a great week. We will see you again soon. Good night, everybody.